Alex Chen stepped off the transport shuttle onto the crystal platform of Verdania University, clutching a single bag that contained everything he owned. The purple sky above him sparkled with two small suns, and the air smelled like flowers mixed with something metallic. Around him, dozens of alien students moved through the arrival area, their voices creating a symphony of clicks, chirps, and musical tones he could barely understand. His translator device buzzed against his ear, working overtime to convert the strange sounds into words he could follow. A tall, lizard-like being with green scales approached him, wearing what looked like professor robes made of shimmering fabric. "You must be the human," Professor Nali said, her voice carrying a slight hiss. "I am your xenobiology instructor. Welcome to the Galactic Institute." Alex nodded and tried to smile. "Thank you. I'm excited to be here." The professor's large yellow eyes studied him carefully, as if she was looking at something dangerous that might explode at any moment. "Yes, well, we shall see how that goes. Follow me." As they walked through the university grounds, Alex noticed how the other students reacted to him. Conversation stopped when he passed by. A group of butterfly-like creatures with gossamer wings actually flew away when they saw him coming. One student that looked like it was made of living crystal backed against a wall and stared at him with wide, frightened eyes. "Is everything okay?" Alex asked Professor Nali quietly. She paused near a fountain that played music instead of water sounds. "You must understand, human, that most species in the galaxy evolved on what we call garden worlds. Peaceful places with gentle weather, friendly animals, and few dangers. Earth is different. Different how? Your planet is classified as a Class 12 death world, the most dangerous category we have on record. Most civilized beings cannot even imagine surviving there for a single day." Alex looked around at the beautiful campus with its soft grass, colorful flowers, and students who looked like they belonged in a fairy tale. "But it's not that bad. Sure, we have some tough animals and weather, but people live normal lives." Professor Nali's scales rippled in what might have been surprise. "Normal? Your world has creatures that hunt in packs, storms that can level cities, and plants that can kill with a touch. The fact that your species not only survived but became intelligent is considered miraculous by most scientists. They reached a large building made of what looked like grown crystal rather than built stone. Students of various species sat on the grass outside, studying from floating books and discussing their lessons. When Alex appeared, the conversations died away. He heard whispers in languages his translator couldn't quite catch, but the tone was clear enough. "They're afraid of me," Alex realized. "Fear is a natural response to the unknown and dangerous," Professor Nali said. "Your reputation precedes you. Stories of human warriors, your brutal sports, your ability to persist through injuries that would kill most beings. To them, you are a walking nightmare." A delicate creature that looked like a cross between a deer and a flower approached them hesitantly. Her name was Rin, according to Alex's translator, and she belonged to the Etheri species. Her voice sounded like wind chimes when she spoke. "Professor Nali, will the human be attending our xenobiology classes?" Rin asked, staying as far from Alex as politeness allowed. "Yes, Rin. Alex will be joining our advanced studies program." Rin's flower-like face went pale. "But what if he becomes aggressive? What if he attacks someone? I've heard stories about human violence and their need to hunt and fight." Alex felt his face grow hot. "I'm not going to attack anyone. I'm just here to study, same as you." But Rin had already backed away, her wings trembling. Other students nearby moved farther from the group, creating an empty circle around Alex. "This is going to be harder than I thought," Alex muttered. Professor Nali guided him toward the dormitory buildings. "You requested a single room, which was wise. Most students would be too frightened to share space with you. Your meals will be delivered to avoid incidents in the dining areas." "Incidents?" "Panic attacks, mostly. Last year, a Glimmerwing student went into shock just from watching a human documentary about your food preparation methods. The sight of you handling raw meat or vegetables grown in dirt might cause mass hysteria." Alex's room turned out to be larger than expected but felt like a luxury prison. The walls were transparent, allowing anyone walking by to see inside. Professor Nali noticed his confusion. "For safety," she explained. "So others can confirm you are not engaging in dangerous activities." "Like what?" "Who knows? Weapon crafting, combat training, predator summoning rituals. Your species has quite an imagination for violence, according to our research." That evening, Alex sat alone in his glass room, watching other students laugh and study together in the courtyard below. He could see them pointing at his window occasionally, some taking pictures with their various recording devices. A few brave ones approached the building but never entered. He opened his communication device to send a message home to Earth, but stopped. What could he say? That he was the monster in everyone else's fairy tale? That these advanced spacefaring civilizations were terrified of a basic human college student? His translator buzzed with an incoming message from the university administration. Tomorrow he would begin classes. His schedule included xenobiology, galactic history, and interspecies communication. All courses had been modified to accommodate his presence, which apparently meant extra security and smaller class sizes. Alex looked out at the peaceful campus with its gentle lighting and soft music drifting through the air. 2 moons hung in the purple sky, and he could see students of a dozen different species enjoying the warm evening together. Except for him, he was starting to understand that being human in this galaxy meant being alone, feared, and misunderstood. But he had come here to learn and to prove that Earth deserved its place among the civilized worlds. Whatever it took, he would show them that humans could be more than the monsters they imagined, even if he had no idea how to do that yet. The xenobiology classroom reminded Alex of a greenhouse mixed with a library. Living plants from dozens of worlds grew along the walls, their leaves glowing softly in colors that didn't exist on Earth. Students sat in floating chairs arranged in a circle, each designed for their specific anatomy. Alex's chair was the only one that looked like furniture instead of art. When he entered the classroom, the quiet conversations stopped immediately. Rin, the flower-like Etheri student, actually moved her chair back 3 more feet. The crystalline student named Korv rotated his body so his sharp edges pointed away from Alex, which Professor Nali had explained was either a defensive posture or a sign of disrespect. Today we will discuss predator-prey relationships in galactic ecosystems, Professor Nali announced, her scales changing to a teaching pattern of blue and green. Most civilized worlds have evolved beyond such primitive survival methods. But understanding these concepts helps us appreciate our peaceful societies. A student that looked like a walking tree raised a branch arm. His name was Grove, and he spoke in rustling sounds that the translator converted to words. Professor, why do we need to study such violent topics? Surely civilized beings have moved beyond these savage concepts. Academic completeness, Professor Nali replied. Even if such behaviors are extinct in modern society. Alex raised his hand slowly, trying not to startle anyone. Half the class flinched anyway. Yes, Alex? I don't think predator-prey relationships are necessarily violent or savage. On Earth, they're just part of how ecosystems stay balanced. Predators usually target the sick and weak animals, which helps keep herds healthy. The silence that followed was so complete that Alex could hear the soft humming of the room's air circulation system. Rin's flower petals had closed completely, and several students had moved their chairs even farther away. Korv's crystalline form chimed with what Alex was learning to recognize as disapproval. Typical Deathworlder thinking. You see violence and death as natural because your species evolved in chaos. It's not about violence, Alex said, keeping his voice calm. It's about balance. Without predators, plant eaters would multiply until they ate all the plants and then starve. The predators prevent that by keeping populations under control. A blue-scaled student named Tesh, who looked like a cross between a fish and a person, spoke up with interest. But surely there are more civilized ways to control population. Technology, education, voluntary limits? Well, yes, intelligent species can do that. But we're talking about wild animals that don't have technology or education. The room fell silent again. Professor Nali's scales had shifted to warning colors of red and orange. Alex, perhaps you could share some examples of these relationships. From your homeworld, Alex thought carefully, trying to choose something that wouldn't sound too frightening. Okay. There are these birds called hawks that hunt smaller birds and mice. The hawks keep the mouse population from growing too large, which prevents the mice from eating all the seeds that grow into new trees. Grove's branches trembled with what might have been horror. You mean the hawk creature kills the mouse creature just for food? Well, yes. The hawk needs to eat to survive, and mice are its natural food source. But why doesn't the mouse just ask the hawk to eat something else? Rin whispered through her closed petals. Alex stared at her. Because they're not intelligent. They can't talk to each other. They're just animals following their instincts. The concept seemed to break something in their understanding. Corv's crystal structure actually dimmed, and Tesh made a sound like water gurgling down a drain. Professor Nolly cleared her throat, a sound like sandpaper on stone. Perhaps we should move on to herbivore adaptation strategies. But Alex was beginning to understand something important about his classmates. Wait, can I ask you all something? What kind of dangerous animals live on your worlds? The students exchanged confused looks. Grove answered first. Dangerous animals? There are no dangerous animals on Arborea. All creatures live in harmony with the forest consciousness. Verdania has some large herbivores that might accidentally step on smaller beings, Professor Nolly added. But they're quite apologetic when it happens. Rin's petals opened slightly. The worst creatures on Etheria are the buzzing ones that make loud noises during flower season. They're very rude. On Crystalia, the most dangerous situation is when the song winds blow too strongly and might crack our outer shells, Corv chimed in. But we have weather shelters for that. Alex felt his worldview shifting. So none of your worlds have animals that hunt other animals? Of course not, Tesh bubbled. What kind of terrible world would produce creatures that harm each other deliberately? The answer hung in the air like a physical weight. Earth. They were describing Earth. Professor Nolly seemed to sense the growing tension in the room. For our next assignment, you will work in groups to study the ecosystem of a designated world. Each group will present their findings on how different species interact. She began reading group assignments, carefully placing Alex with the most academically confident students. Corv, Tesh, and a gas being named Mist who communicated through color changes. Your group will study the ecosystem of Shadowmere, a Class 7 world in the Outer Rim, Professor Nolly announced. You'll have access to our research facility's observation chambers. After class, Alex's group members gathered in the hallway, maintaining their careful distance from him. Corv spoke first, his crystal voice ringing with academic authority. I suggest we divide the work logically. I will handle the mathematical models of population distribution. Tesh can analyze the water-based ecosystems. Mist will study atmospheric interactions. What about me? Alex asked. The three aliens exchanged what Alex was learning to recognize as meaningful looks. Perhaps you could observe, Tesh said diplomatically, from a safe distance. Without interfering. You think I'm going to interfere with a research project? Not intentionally, Corv chimed. But humans have a documented tendency toward impulsive violence when encountering unfamiliar situations. It would be irresponsible to risk our academic standings. Alex felt anger rising in his chest, but he pushed it down. Getting angry would only prove their point about human aggression. I'll do whatever part of the project you assign me, he said quietly. I just want to learn. As they walked toward the research facility to schedule their observation time, Alex noticed other students in the hallway pressing themselves against walls to let him pass. A group of young aliens that looked like floating jellyfish actually moved to a different floor when they saw him coming. He was starting to realize that earning respect in this place would require more than just good grades and polite behavior. He needed to prove that humans were more than the monsters these peaceful species imagined them to be. But first he had to figure out how to do that without scaring everyone even more than he already did. The research facility looked like a crystal palace built into the side of a mountain. Transparent tubes and walkways connected different sections, allowing visitors to observe the contained ecosystems without disturbing them. Alex followed his xenobiology class through the entrance, noting how the other students stayed clustered as far from him as the walkway allowed. Dr. Willow, the facility director, greeted them at the main observation deck. She belonged to a species that looked like walking flowers with multiple colorful heads that took turns speaking. Welcome, young scholars, to the Verdania Xenobiology Research Center, her yellow head said cheerfully. Here we study the fascinating creatures of the galaxy in perfect safety. Her blue head continued. Each habitat is carefully controlled to prevent any dangerous interactions between species. Dangerous interactions? Alex asked. The pink head turned toward him with what might have been surprise. Competition for resources, territorial disputes, or, heaven forbid, actual predation. We maintain complete peace between all species. Professor Nolly guided the group toward the first exhibit, a massive transparent chamber filled with what looked like a meadow from a fairy tale. Creatures that resembled flying flowers danced through the air while furry balls rolled happily across rainbow-colored grass. These are dreamweavers from the paradise world of bliss, Dr. Willow explained through her green head. They feed on flower nectar and spend their time creating beautiful light patterns. The students pressed against the viewing windows, cooing with delight as the creatures performed aerial ballets. Alex watched too, but something felt wrong to him. "What do they do when the flowers run out?" he asked. The facility directors' heads all turned toward him at once. "Run out? Why would flowers run out?" "Well, if there are more dreamweavers than flowers can support, some of them would go hungry, right?" Dr. Willow's purple head spoke with confusion. "But we provide exactly the right number of flowers for the population. No creature goes hungry here. What about in their natural habitat?" "Their natural habitat is perfectly balanced. Every world in the galaxy maintains harmony between its species." Alex thought about the nature documentaries he'd watched on Earth, with their endless cycles of birth, death, competition, and survival. But what happens if there's a bad season? Disease, natural disasters? The entire class had gone quiet again. Rin's petals were starting to close, and Korv's crystal structure was making worried chiming sounds. "Such things don't happen on civilized worlds," Professor Nolly said firmly. "Shall we move to the next exhibit?" They walked through a series of chambers, each containing creatures that looked more like animated toys than animals. Everything was soft, colorful, and completely harmless. Alex noticed that all the herbivores were provided with unlimited food, and the few scavengers had pre-killed meals waiting for them. "This is fascinating," Tesh bubbled as they watched some creatures that looked like living puddles play in an artificial stream. "Look how they cooperate to share the best spots for sunbathing." "They're beautiful," Rin agreed, her petals fully open again. "So peaceful and kind to each other." Alex found himself thinking about the woods behind his childhood home on Earth, where he'd watched deer compete fiercely for the best grazing spots, and where coyotes and bears and mountain lions all played their parts in keeping the forest ecosystem balanced through what these aliens would probably call horrific violence. "Dr. Willow," Alex said carefully, "do you have any actual predators here?" All 6 of the directors' heads turned toward him with expressions of shock. "Predators? Here, in our research facility?" "For educational purposes," Alex clarified quickly. "To study how predator-prey relationships work. We would never house such dangerous creatures." Her redhead declared, "The psychological trauma to our researchers would be unacceptable." "But surely you have some examples of competitive species? Animals that might compete for the same resources?" Dr. Willow's heads had a rapid conversation with each other in chirping sounds too fast for the translator to follow. Finally, her yellow head spoke. "Well, there is one exhibit we typically don't show to students. It's considered quite disturbing." Professor Nolly's scales shifted to warning colors. "Perhaps we should skip it today." No. Grove's branches rustled with nervous curiosity. "If it's educational, we should see it." Dr. Willow led them down a corridor that was noticeably more secure than the others. Metal doors, electronic locks, and warning signs in multiple languages lined the walls. The other students began to look nervous. "This is our most dangerous specimen," she announced as they approached a heavily reinforced viewing chamber, captured from the wild regions of Shadowmere. "We call it the Shadow Maw." Through the thick, transparent barriers, Alex could see a creature about the size of a large dog. It had dark fur, sharp teeth, and yellow eyes. It was currently lying on a comfortable bed, playing with what looked like a toy ball. The alien students gasped in horror. Rin fainted immediately, and Korv's crystal structure flickered with terror. Several other students backed away from the viewing window entirely. "Behold," Dr. Willow whispered through her most serious head, "a true predator." Alex stared at the creature. It looked like a cross between a wolf and a house cat. Definitely a carnivore, but not particularly large or frightening by Earth standards. It was actually kind of cute. "What does it hunt?" he asked. "Small herbivores," Dr. Willow replied with a shudder. "Sometimes creatures as large as your arm. It has been observed stalking prey for hours before striking." "How many people has it killed?" "People? Oh, it's never encountered people. But our computer models suggest it could be extremely dangerous if provoked." Alex watched the Shadow Maw catch its toy ball and playfully bat it around. It reminded him of his neighbor's dog back home. "Next week," Professor Nolly announced, "we will return for a special behavioral study session. Dr. Willow's team will demonstrate the creature's hunting instincts using remote feeding mechanisms." As they walked back through the facility, Alex's classmates chattered nervously about the terrifying predator they had witnessed. To them, the Shadow Maw represented the worst nightmare of their peaceful civilizations, a creature that deliberately harmed other living beings. To Alex, it looked like something he could probably pet if given the chance. He was beginning to understand just how different his world really was from theirs. On Earth, the Shadow Maw would be considered a mid-level predator at best, nothing compared to the grizzly bears, great white sharks, or pack-hunting wolves that humans had learned to live alongside. But to these gentle species from their garden worlds, it was the most dangerous thing they could imagine. As they left the facility, Alex found himself wondering what would happen if these aliens ever encountered a real Earth predator. The thought made him smile, then immediately feel guilty about it. After all, he was supposed to be proving that humans were civilized, not dangerous, even if he was starting to realize that maybe, just maybe, being dangerous wasn't always a bad thing. The observation chamber hummed with nervous energy as Alex's xenobiology class gathered for their behavioral study session. 20 students arranged themselves in a semicircle around the reinforced viewing area, with Alex seated separately at the back. The extra distance was supposedly for everyone's comfort, but Alex suspected it was more about keeping the dangerous human away from the group. Dr. Willow's 6 heads were animated with excitement as she prepared her demonstration. "Today you will witness predatory behavior in a controlled environment," her blue head announced. "Our remote feeding system will introduce prey items while we observe the Shadow Maw's hunting responses from complete safety." Professor Nolly stood near the control panel, her scales shifting to alert patterns. "Remember, students, this is purely academic. The creature cannot escape its containment under any circumstances." Through the thick, transparent walls, Alex could see the Shadow Maw lounging in what looked like a luxury pet habitat. It had food dispensers, comfortable bedding, and even some climbing structures. The creature seemed relaxed, occasionally yawning to show its sharp teeth, which made several students whimper with fear. "First, we will release a standard prey analog," Dr. Willow continued through her yellow head. A small rabbit-like robot dropped from a ceiling dispenser into the Shadow Maw's enclosure. The Shadow Maw lifted its head with mild interest, sniffed the mechanical prey, then promptly ignored it and returned to grooming its fur. "Interesting," Professor Nolly noted. "The predator is not responding to the stimulus as expected." Rin, who had been revived from her earlier fainting spell, watched from behind a portable privacy screen. "Maybe it's not hungry?" "Predators should hunt regardless of hunger levels," Corv chimed with academic confidence. "It's their primitive programming." Dr. Willow tried several more prey analogs, including ones that moved, made sounds, and even released scent markers. The Shadow Maw showed slight curiosity but no aggressive behavior. If anything, it seemed bored. "This is highly unusual," Dr. Willow muttered through her confused green head. "Perhaps we need to increase the stimulation levels." She began adjusting controls on a complex panel, increasing the prey robot's speed and adding more sensory triggers. The Shadow Maw finally stood up and approached one of the robots, but instead of attacking, it gently batted at it like it was playing. "Why isn't it hunting?" Tesh bubbled with confusion. Alex raised his hand. "Maybe it doesn't see the robots as real prey. It probably knows they're fake." The alien students turned to stare at him with expressions ranging from surprise to horror. The idea that the Shadow Maw might be intelligent enough to distinguish between real and artificial prey clearly hadn't occurred to them. "Impossible," Dr. Willow's red head declared. "Predators operate on pure instinct. They cannot engage in complex reasoning. But it's obviously smart enough to—" Alex began. His words were cut off by a sharp electronic whine. The lights in the observation chamber flickered, and warning alarms began blaring throughout the facility. "Power fluctuation in containment systems," Professor Nolly called out, checking her handheld scanner. "Nothing serious, just a minor grid instability." The lights went out completely. Emergency lighting kicked in a second later, casting everything in an eerie red glow. But in that brief moment of darkness, Alex heard a sound that made his blood run cold, the distinctive hiss of pressure seals releasing. "Containment breach in Chamber 7, an automated voice announced calmly. "Initiating lockdown protocols." Chamber 7 was the Shadow Maw's habitat. The heavy security doors slammed shut, trapping everyone in the observation room. Through the transparent walls, Alex could see the Shadow Maw's enclosure standing open, its containment barrier flickering and failing. The shadow maw stepped cautiously out of its habitat and into the main observation chamber with them. Chaos erupted instantly. Rin screamed and collapsed in a dead faint. Grove's branches thrashed wildly as he tried to squeeze himself into the smallest possible space. Corv's crystal structure went completely transparent in what Alex now recognized as terror camouflage. "Stay calm," Professor Nali shouted, but her own scales had turned bright yellow with fear. She rushed toward the emergency control panel, trying to restore the containment systems. The shadow maw looked around the room with obvious confusion. Its ears were flat against its head and it was making small whimpering sounds. To Alex's experienced eye, the creature looked frightened and overwhelmed, not aggressive, but his classmates saw only their worst nightmare made real. Students pressed themselves against the walls, some hyperventilating, others going into shock. Tesh had somehow managed to flatten himself into a puddle and was trying to squeeze under a chair. "It's going to kill us all," someone screamed. The shadow maw's head snapped toward the sound and it crouched lower, clearly startled by the noise and chaos around it. Professor Nali reached for the emergency controls but tripped over a panicking student. She hit the floor hard, her head striking the metal wall with a sickening crack. She didn't get up. "Professor," Alex called out, but she was unconscious. The lockdown system was still active. No one could get in or out until the containment breach was resolved. The shadow maw was pacing now, becoming more agitated as the students' panic escalated around it. Alex realized with crystal clarity that his classmates were about to get someone killed. Possibly themselves, possibly the shadow maw, or both. Their terror was feeding on itself, making the situation worse by the second. He looked at the frightened creature, recognizing the signs he'd learned growing up around Earth's wildlife. The flattened ears, the low posture, the rapid breathing. This wasn't an aggressive predator preparing to attack. This was a scared animal that had been suddenly thrust into a chaotic environment full of strange sounds and smells. While his classmates cowered in terror, Alex stood up slowly and began walking toward the shadow maw. "Alex, no," Corv's voice cracked with panic. "It will tear you apart." But Alex had spent his childhood in the woods of Earth, where creatures far more dangerous than this roamed freely. He'd helped his father rescue injured bears, tracked wounded mountain lions, and even assisted wildlife officials with relocating aggressive wolves. The shadow maw was just another frightened animal that needed help getting home. Alex extended his hand slowly, palm down, and spoke in the calm, steady voice his father had taught him to use with wild creatures. "Hey there, buddy. It's okay. Nobody's going to hurt you." The observation chamber fell into absolute silence, except for the soft whimpering of the shadow maw and the rapid breathing of terrified students. Alex moved slowly across the room, his footsteps deliberate and calm. Behind him, he could hear Rin's barely contained sobs and the crystalline chattering of Corv's panicked vibrations. The shadow maw watched Alex approach, its yellow eyes wide with uncertainty. The creature's body language screamed confusion and fear, ears pinned back, tail tucked low, muscles tense but not in an attack posture. Alex had seen the same stance in countless Earth animals, from frightened dogs to cornered deer. "That's it," Alex murmured, keeping his voice steady and low. "I know you're scared. This isn't your home, is it? Too many strange smells, too much noise." The shadow maw tilted its head slightly, apparently recognizing that Alex's tone was different from the chaos around them. Its breathing began to slow, though it remained crouched and ready to flee. "Alex, please," Professor Nali whispered weakly from where she lay against the wall. "Get away from that creature." "It's not going to hurt anyone," Alex replied without taking his eyes off the shadow maw. "Look at its body language. It's terrified." "Body language?" Tesh's voice was barely audible from his puddle form under a chair. "It's a mindless killer." Alex shook his head slowly. "No, it's not. Watch its ears. They're flat against its head because it's scared. Its tail is tucked because it's trying to make itself small and non-threatening. If it wanted to attack, its ears would be forward and its tail would be up." He took another step closer, and the shadow maw shifted nervously but didn't retreat. "How do you know this?" Corv whispered, his crystal form barely visible in his terror camouflage. "Because I grew up around predators," Alex said simply. "Real ones. This little guy wouldn't last 5 minutes in the woods behind my house on Earth." The statement sent a ripple of shock through the alien students. The idea that Alex considered the shadow maw, Their ultimate nightmare predator to belittle was incomprehensible to them. Alex continued his slow approach, extending his hand palm down in a non-threatening gesture. The shadow maw sniffed cautiously in his direction, its nostrils flaring as it tried to identify his scent. "You've never smelled a human before, have you?" Alex said conversationally. "I probably smell like all sorts of things your instincts don't recognize. But here's the thing, I'm not prey and I'm not a threat. I'm just trying to help you get home." The shadow maw's ears twitched forward slightly, a sign that its fear was beginning to ease. It took a tentative step toward Alex, then another. "Alex, it's approaching you." Rin's voice cracked with terror. "Run!" Running would trigger its chase instincts, Alex explained patiently. "That's probably the worst thing I could do right now." Instead, he crouched down to make himself smaller and less intimidating. The shadow maw paused, considering this change in posture, then took several more steps forward until it was close enough to touch. "May I?" Alex asked the creature softly, as if it could understand. "I know you probably need some comfort right now." He moved his hand very slowly toward the shadow maw's head. The creature tensed for a moment, then seemed to make a decision. It pressed its forehead against Alex's palm. The sound that came from the observation chamber was like a collective gasp of disbelief. Students who had been cowering in terror now watched in stunned amazement as Alex gently scratched behind the shadow maw's ears. It's purring," Tesh whispered in wonder. Indeed, a low rumbling sound was coming from the shadow maw's chest as it leaned into Alex's touch. Its tail had started to wag slightly, and its ears were now fully forward in a relaxed position. "They're social creatures," Alex explained, running his hand along the shadow maw's neck. "Look at its behavior patterns in the habitat videos. It was lonely. Dr. Willow, your research team has been keeping it in isolation, haven't you?" Dr. Willow's pink head managed to nod weakly. "Predators are too dangerous to house in groups, but this species probably lives in family packs in the wild. No wonder it wasn't responding to your hunting simulations. It was depressed and lonely." The shadow maw had now settled down next to Alex, leaning against his side like an oversized dog. It looked around the room with calm, curious eyes, occasionally making soft chirping sounds that sounded almost friendly. "This is impossible." Grove's branches rustled with confusion. "Predators don't have emotions. They don't form social bonds." "Who told you that?" Alex asked, continuing to pet the now relaxed creature. "Every predator species on Earth has complex social structures. Wolves have family packs with intricate hierarchies. Lions live in prides with multiple generations. Even solitary predators like tigers have extensive communication networks." Professor Nolly managed to sit up, her scales cycling through colors Alex had never seen before. "You're suggesting that predators are intelligent? Emotional?" "More intelligent than you've given them credit for," Alex confirmed. "This little lady, yes, she's female. You can tell by the facial structure. Has probably been trying to communicate her distress to your researchers for months." The shadow maw looked up at Alex when he identified her gender and made a soft sound that definitely sounded like agreement. "She's been alone, confused, and probably homesick. That's why she wasn't hunting your robot prey. She was too depressed to bother with fake food when real social interaction was what she needed." Alex stood up slowly, and the shadow maw rose with him, staying close to his side like a loyal companion. "Now how do we get you home, girl?" he asked the creature. To everyone's amazement, the shadow maw looked toward her original habitat and made an inquiring sound, as if asking if that was where Alex wanted her to go. "Smart girl," Alex said approvingly. "Come on, let's get you back to your comfortable bed." He walked slowly toward the habitat entrance, the shadow maw following beside him like a well-trained pet. At the threshold, she paused and looked back at Alex with what could only be described as gratitude, then padded into her enclosure and settled onto her sleeping area. Alex manually activated the containment field from the outside controls, sealing the habitat safely. The emergency systems finally reset, and the lockdown doors began to open, but none of the students moved. They sat in stunned silence, staring at Alex as if he had just performed an impossible miracle. "How?" was all Professor Nolly could manage to say. Alex looked around at his classmates, the same classmates who had feared him, avoided him, and treated him like a dangerous monster. "Because," he said quietly, "sometimes it takes one predator to understand another." Word of what happened in the research facility spread through Verdania University like wildfire. Within hours, Alex found his transparent dormitory room surrounded by curious students from dozens of species, all wanting to catch a glimpse of the human who had tamed the galaxy's most feared predator with his bare hands. But the attention felt different now. Instead of fearful whispers and terrified stares, Alex heard excited discussions and admiring comments. Students who had once fled when he approached now lingered hopefully in hallways, hoping for a chance to speak with him. The change was most obvious in his xenobiology class. When Alex entered the next day, instead of the usual empty circle around his seat, he found Rin sitting nearby with her petals fully open and a shy smile on her flower-like face. "Alex," she said, her wind chime voice carrying none of its previous terror. "I wanted to apologize for being so frightened of you. I didn't understand." Tesh had reformed into his normal fish person shape instead of his defensive puddle form. "That was the most amazing thing I've ever witnessed," he bubbled enthusiastically. "You spoke to that creature like it was a person." Even Korv had abandoned his defensive posture, his crystal structure now chiming with what Alex recognized as respect. "Your species possesses capabilities that our academic models never predicted. How did you know the Shadow Maw was female? Same way you'd identify gender in most mammalian species," Alex explained. "Facial bone structure, body proportions, behavioral cues. It's not really that complicated once you know what to look for." Professor Nali entered the classroom, her scales displaying patterns Alex had never seen before, complex swirls of gold and silver that seemed to indicate deep thoughtfulness. "Students," she announced, "today we have a special guest lecturer." Dr. Willow walked in, all 6 of her heads looking somewhat embarrassed. "After yesterday's events, I realized that our understanding of predatory behavior has been severely limited. I've asked Alex to help us revise our research protocols." Alex felt his face grow warm. "I'm just a student. I don't know enough to teach anyone." "On the contrary," Dr. Willow's blue head said earnestly, "you demonstrated knowledge that our entire scientific community lacks. We've been studying predators as if they were mindless killing machines, when clearly they're complex social beings with emotional needs." Professor Nali activated a holographic display showing footage from the research facility. "Alex, would you be willing to walk us through what you observed about the Shadow Maw's behavior?" Alex stood up, still not quite believing he was about to lecture a room full of advanced alien students. "Well, the first thing I noticed was that she was exhibiting signs of depression and social isolation." As he spoke, analyzing the creature's body language and explaining the behavioral cues he'd recognized, Alex watched his classmates take careful notes. Questions came rapidly, not accusations or challenges, but genuine curiosity about concepts they'd never considered. "On Earth," Alex continued, "we've learned that predators are often the most intelligent species in their ecosystems. They have to be. Hunting requires problem-solving, strategy, and often complex social coordination." Grove's branches rustled with fascination. "So predators might actually be more intelligent than their prey?" "Often, yes. A wolf pack has to outsmart their prey, coordinate their attack, and adapt to changing conditions. That requires a lot more brain power than just eating grass." The implications seemed to hit the alien students like a physical force. If predators were intelligent, social, and emotional, then everything they'd been taught about the nature of violence and survival needed to be reconsidered. "Alex," Rin said hesitantly, "what other creatures live on Earth that we might find educational?" Alex thought about how to answer that without causing mass panic. "Well, humans share the planet with creatures like grizzly bears, which are about 10 times the size of the Shadow Maw, and can run faster than your average hovercar. There are great white sharks that can bite through metal, and pack hunters like wolves that coordinate attacks with military precision." The silence that followed was profound. But it wasn't the terrified silence Alex had grown used to. It was the silence of minds being blown by new possibilities. "And humans live alongside these creatures?" Tesh asked in wonder. "We've learned to coexist. Sometimes we compete for the same resources. Sometimes we help each other. Sometimes we just stay out of each other's way. It's all part of maintaining ecological balance." Dr. Willow's green head spoke up. "Alex, how would you feel about working with our research team to redesign our predator habitats? It's clear that we've been approaching this entirely wrong." "I'd be honored," Alex replied. Over the following weeks, Alex found himself at the center of a revolution in galactic xenobiology. His insights led to new habitat designs that prioritize social interaction, and mental stimulation over mere containment. The Shadow Maw, now housed with a compatible companion and given environmental enrichment activities, became a completely different creature, playful, curious, and obviously happy, but the changes went far beyond the research facility. Alex's human perspective began influencing how the university approached dozens of different subjects. His insights into competition, resource management, and survival strategies provided new frameworks for understanding everything from economics to sociology. One evening, as Alex sat in his no longer transparent dormitory room, the privacy barriers had been installed after he'd proven he wasn't dangerous. He received a communication from the Galactic Education Council. "Mr. Chen," the message began, "your contributions to xenobiological research have come to our attention. We would like to invite you to present your findings at the Interspecies Academic Symposium on Kepler Station." Alex stared at the invitation in disbelief. The Interspecies Academic Symposium was the most prestigious academic gathering in known space. Students from across the galaxy competed for decades just to attend, let alone present. A soft chime at his door interrupted his thoughts. He opened it to find Rin, Tesh, Corv, and Grove waiting outside with excited expressions. "We heard about the symposium invitation," Rin said, her petals glowing with happiness. "We wanted to congratulate you. And to ask if you'd like to work on your presentation with us," Tesh added. "As your research partners." Alex looked at his former classmates, the same students who had once been too terrified to share a room with him. Now they were volunteering to work alongside him as equals. "I'd like that," he said simply. As they settled into his room to begin planning, Alex realized that he'd accomplished something he'd never expected when he arrived on Verdania. He hadn't just proven that humans could be civilized. He'd shown that being from a dangerous world could actually be an advantage. His Deathworlder origins hadn't made him a monster to be feared. They'd made him a bridge between two different ways of understanding the universe: the peaceful garden world perspective and the harsh reality of survival that had shaped human evolution. 6 months later, Alex stood before an audience of the galaxy's greatest minds at Kepler Station, preparing to deliver his presentation on predatory intelligence and ecosystem dynamics, a Deathworlder perspective. In the front row sat his research team, Rin, Tesh, Corv, Grove, and Professor Nali, all beaming with pride. Behind them, representatives from dozens of species waited to hear insights that only a human could provide. As Alex began to speak, he thought about the scared, lonely student who had arrived on Verdania, fearing he would never fit in among the galaxy's civilized species. He'd been right that he would never fit in. Instead, he'd helped create a place where he belonged, and in doing so, had opened up new possibilities for understanding the complex, dangerous, beautiful universe they all shared. "The first thing we need to understand about predators," Alex began, "is that they're not monsters. They're teachers. And sometimes, if we're willing to listen, they have a lot to teach us about what it really means to be intelligent."